The year was 1958. It was a Sunday evening in America, which meant that 70 million people were doing the same thing at the same time. They were sitting in front of their television sets. Television in 1958 was not what it would become. It was newer, stranger, more dangerous in the specific way that live broadcasting is always dangerous, because what goes out, and there is no taking it back. And the men who ran the networks understood this and controlled their programming accordingly. Every word was vetted, every guest was managed, every appearance by a major Hollywood star had been negotiated in advance with the studio that owned them, and the terms of those negotiations were clear. The star would be charming, the star would be cooperative, and the star would say nothing that the studio had not approved. On this particular Sunday evening, a man named Harold Wallis, one of the most powerful studio executives in Hollywood, a producer with 30 years of hits behind him, and the absolute confidence of someone who had never been told no by anyone who mattered, sat across from Natalie Wood on live television and told 70 million people something about her that was not true. He did not expect her to respond. He had been dealing with actresses for 30 years. He understood the system, and the system was clear. The star smiles, the star agrees, the star says thank you and moves on. The studio had prepared Natalie for this appearance. The studio had told her what to say. The studio had, in the language of the contracts that bound her absolutely, made it explicit that her professional future depended on her cooperation. Natalie Wood was 19 years old. She put down her coffee cup, looked directly into the camera, and said something that nobody in that studio, nobody at that network, and nobody watching at home had expected to hear. And 70 million people heard every word. If you want the stories Hollywood tried to bury forever, subscribe to our channel. We bring you the truth that powerful people spent decades hiding. Context. To understand what happened on that Sunday evening in 1958, you have to understand what Natalie Wood's life looked like from the inside at 19. From the outside, it looked like success. She was under contract to Warner Brothers, one of the most powerful studios in Hollywood. She had appeared in dozens of films. She was one of the most recognizable faces in America. Her name above the title guaranteed a certain level of audience interest that studios competed for, and studios, once they had it, were extremely careful to protect. Protecting it meant controlling it. Natalie's contract with Warner Bros. Gave the studio rights over her professional life that extended far beyond the films she appeared in. They controlled which projects she could and could not accept. They controlled the terms of her public appearances, interviews, television spots, publicity events. They controlled what she could say in those appearances, sometimes literally. Publicity handlers traveled with her to interviews and sat in rooms where journalists asked questions, and the understanding between all parties was that certain topics were off limits and certain answers had been pre-approved. The studio's investment in Natalie's compliance was not simply financial, though it was certainly that. It was also structural. The system that had built the studio era of Hollywood, the system that had made Warner Bros. And MGM and Paramount into the most profitable entertainment companies in the world, depended on the absolute controllability of its stars. One actress who said something unrehearsed on live television, one moment of genuine feeling that the publicity department had not vetted, could cost more than the film it was supposed to promote. Studios had dealt with unruly stars before. The mechanisms were established and efficient. Suspension without pay, loan-outs to lesser studios for lesser projects. The quiet word in the right ear that ensured the uncooperative actress found fewer scripts on her doorstep and fewer directors willing to work with her. The system did not need to threaten anyone directly. Everyone already understood the consequences. Natalie understood them. She had been inside the system since she was 4 years old. She had watched what happened to the actresses who didn't cooperate, and she had cooperated consistently and professionally for 15 years. What changed in 1958 was not the system. The system did not change. What changed was Natalie. The previous 3 years had done something to her that the studio had not accounted for. Rebel without a cause had opened a door inside her that could not be closed again. The work she had done with Elia Kazan and Nicholas Ray had given her a standard against which she now measured everything else, and what she was being asked to do, the films the studio was assigning her, the roles that required nothing from her but her face and her compliance, fell short of that standard in ways she could no longer ignore. She had started to have opinions. Worse, she had started to express them. The studio had noticed. The studio had responded in the way studios responded, with the quiet tightening of control that precedes more significant action, with more handlers in more rooms, with more pre-approved answers and more explicit instructions about what was and was not acceptable in public. And then Harold Wallis booked the television appearance. The setup. The program was one of the most watched variety and interview shows on American television. The format was familiar. A host, a panel of guests, conversation that moved between entertainment and mild controversy in the way that television conversation did in 1958, carefully, within well-established limits, never touching anything that the sponsors or the networks or the studios would find genuinely uncomfortable. Harold Wallis had produced some of the most commercially successful films of the studio era: Casablanca, The Maltese Falcon, decades of hits that had made him one of the most powerful men in Hollywood, a man whose opinion of an actress could open doors or close them permanently, whose public endorsement was worth more than almost any review, whose public criticism was worth considerably less than that. He had opinions about Natalie Wood. Specifically, he had opinions about the direction her career should take. Opinions that happened to coincide precisely with his own financial interests and that happened to diverge significantly from what Natalie herself wanted. The substance of what he intended to say on television that evening had been communicated in advance to the studio, and the studio had communicated to Natalie, and the message was clear. Wallis would describe the kinds of films he believed suited her talents and her image, and Natalie would agree, and the 70 million people watching would receive confirmation that one of Hollywood's most powerful producers and one of Hollywood's most promising young stars were in perfect alignment about the direction of her career. It was, in the language of the studio system, a managed appearance, beneficial to both parties. Routine. Natalie arrived at the studio that evening with her handler, reviewed the pre-approved talking points one final time, and sat down across from Harold Wallis under the lights. The host introduced them. The cameras went live, and Harold Wallis said what he had planned to say. He described in the comfortable and authoritative tone of a man who has spent 30 years having his descriptions accepted as facts the kind of actress Natalie Wood was, the kind of roles that suited her, the kind of films that would best serve her talents, which happened not coincidentally to be the kind of films he was producing. Light, commercially reliable, carefully positioned for maximum audience appeal and minimum artistic risk, the kind of films that required from their lead actress exactly what the studio had spent 15 years training Natalie to provide.
He smiled at her as he said it. It was the smile of a man who has arranged things to his satisfaction and is waiting for the final piece to settle into place. Natalie Wood picked up her coffee cup. She put it down. She looked at Harold Wallis. Then she looked at the camera. And she said, with respect, "That is not who I am." What followed those 6 words has been described by everyone who watched it. In the studio, at home, in the offices of the studio that was simultaneously receiving frantic phone calls from the network, in remarkably consistent terms. Silence. The particular silence of a live broadcast when something unrehearsed has just occurred and the people responsible for managing the broadcast are trying to calculate, in real time, whether what they have just heard is as significant as it seems. It was. Natalie did not stop at 6 words. She continued. Not with anger. Her voice was steady, controlled, the voice of someone who has thought about this for a long time and has finally found the room large enough to say it in. She described, in plain and specific language, the difference between the films she had been making and the films she wanted to make. She described what she had found on the set of Rebel Without a Cause, not in those terms, not by naming it directly, but in terms that anyone who had watched her work would understand immediately. She described what she believed she was capable of. She described what she was being asked to do instead. She was not performing. She was not making a speech. She was a 19-year-old woman on live television in 1958 telling the truth about her professional life to 70 million people, and the truth was not what Harold Wallis had arranged for her to say. The phone calls began before the program ended. The studio's publicity department, which had been monitoring the broadcast from the moment Natalie's segment began, was on the line with the network within seconds of her remarks. The conversation was urgent and not pleasant and concerned primarily with the question of what could be done, which the network's answer to was, nothing. The broadcast was live. What had gone out had gone out. The studio's response to Natalie was swift and followed the established patterns. She was called into a meeting the following morning. The meeting was attended by the studio's head of talent, 2 senior producers, and a legal representative whose presence was intended to communicate the seriousness with which the studio viewed the previous evening's events. The conversation was direct. What Natalie had done was a breach of her contractual obligations. The studio had arranged the appearance in good faith. The studio had communicated clearly what was expected. Natalie had agreed to those expectations and had then violated them in front of the largest possible audience. The consequences, they told her, would be significant. Natalie listened to all of it. When they finished, she said something that the people in that room described, in the years that followed, as the moment they understood that the relationship between Natalie Wood and Warner Brothers had fundamentally changed. She said she understood the consequences. And she said she would do the same thing again. The studio did what studios did. The suspension came. The projects she had been attached to were quietly reassigned. Her name disappeared from conversations it had previously been part of. The machinery of institutional pressure operated exactly as it had been designed to operate. But something had shifted that the machinery was not designed to address. The 70 million people who had watched that Sunday evening had seen something they did not often see on their television screens. They had seen a young woman, in a system specifically designed to prevent this, say something true in public. And the response to that, in letters, in conversations, in the specific way the public's perception of Natalie Wood shifted in the months that followed, was not what the studio had anticipated. The audience did not turn against her. They turned toward her. The people who were in the studio that evening described the moment in terms that remained consistent across decades of interviews and recollections. The host, speaking to a journalist years later, said it was the only time in his career that he had watched a live broadcast go somewhere that no one in the production had prepared for and that no amount of professional experience had equipped him to redirect. He said he had seen guests deviate from prepared material before. He had never seen anyone do what Natalie Wood did, turn to the camera, address the audience directly, and say something so specific and so clearly true that the professional infrastructure around her simply stopped functioning for a moment. A camera operator who was working the broadcast that evening described the experience of watching Natalie's face through his viewfinder. He said he had framed thousands of faces on television and he could tell the difference between a performance and something real. He said what he saw on Natalie Wood's face that night was real. He said it was the most real thing he had seen in years of working in television. Several members of the studio audience who had been present in the theater described in letters written to entertainment publications the specific quality of the silence that followed Natalie's remarks. Not the silence of shock. The silence of recognition. The silence of people hearing something they already knew was true, hearing it said out loud for the first time. Harold Wallis never publicly addressed the incident. He continued his career. He continued producing. He never, in any interview or memoir or public statement, mentioned the Sunday evening when a 19-year-old actress looked into a camera in front of 70 million people and declined to say what he had arranged for her to say. His silence on the subject was, in its way, as eloquent as anything he might have said. Natalie Wood was 19 years old on that Sunday evening in 1958. She had been inside the studio system for 15 years. She had cooperated with it, complied with it, been shaped by it in ways that ran deep enough that she herself could not always distinguish between what the system had made her and what she actually was. And then she sat down in front of 70 million people and said 6 words that the system had not prepared for. With respect, that is not who I am. 6 words that cost her projects and suspended her career and put her in rooms with lawyers and executives who explained in careful detail what non-compliance meant in contractual terms. 6 words that the 70 million people watching recognized immediately as true in the way that truth is recognized before it is analyzed. 6 words that said, "I have been performing compliance for 15 years, and I am done, and I am telling you this in the largest room I will ever stand in so that there is no possibility of pretending it was not said." The studio system did not collapse because of those 6 words. The mechanisms of control did not suddenly fail. Harold Wallis continued to produce films. Warner Brothers continued to manage its stars. The contracts continued to specify what was and was not acceptable. But something had changed. Because the 70 million people who had watched that evening had seen the system from the inside, had seen the gap between what a studio arranged and what a young woman actually believed, and they had watched the young woman choose truth over consequence in the most public way imaginable. That is not easily forgotten. Natalie Wood went on to give some of the finest performances of her generation. She fought for the roles that mattered. She built a career on her own terms inside a system that had spent 15 years trying to define those terms for her. She started on a Sunday evening in 1958. In front of 70 million people. With 6 words.